Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the BE Sustainable podcast from UCM. We're crossing over into the territory of another podcast, and I have today the two hosts of the Sustainability Sprints podcast, Jenny and Sheri-Leigh. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit. This is not an advert for Sustainability Sprints, but I think it's important to understand where they're coming from. So, but I would encourage everybody to listen because it is good stuff. But I'm going to let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Mike. So my name is Dr. Jenny Davidson. As you've already said, I'm a co-host of the Sustainability Prints podcast with Sheri-Leigh Miles. But my day job is as an academic. So I'm a senior lecturer and a climate change fellow at Newcastle University. I've been working in sustainability for about 25 years. In the first instance, I worked in the private sector and I moved into higher education about 10 years ago. I'm really passionate about sustainability. I'm really passionate about leadership for sustainability. And I'm really passionate about education for leadership in sustainability.
Yeah, and I'm Sheri-Leigh Miles. I am co-founding director of Net Positive Futures. So we're a micro business actually based up in Yorkshire. Also worked in sustainability for over 25 years and have worked with loads of interesting people on interesting projects. Find myself most often working in quite tricky spaces. So been doing some work to help people understand sustainability probably for most of my career. And sometimes that's with teams, sometimes that's with whole organisations, sometimes that's with individuals. But making sense of sustainability is really important to me.
One of the things that we keep coming up against in our various conversations and our various episodes, and one that I think is a thread for you as well, is why operationalising sustainability is proving so difficult. I mean, obviously for us, it's very much about the built environment. For you, you're cross-sector, cross-discipline. You cover a far wider ground than us. But why is it so difficult to operationalise sustainability?
Humans. I think it's people. I think we can build into systems and processes, but people will either help or hinder that, actually. So I think sometimes that's understanding. But I think if you were pressing me to give a one-word answer, it would definitely be people. And people are tricky and they're not a homogenous mass. So you can create a strategy, you can agree a policy, but actually enacting those things requires humans to understand, engage and do things differently. So for me, it's that human element.
Yeah, and acknowledging that as individuals, we're all really, really different. So for me, it's about the lack of context for sustainability, individual context. It's about not quite understanding what it means for me as a human being, not quite understanding what that means for me in my role, and therefore what I need to do with it day to day. And I think one of the really big barriers to that understanding or that contextualising is just the sheer scale of it. It can feel very daunting and very unachievable or untouchable almost. It can feel distant.
Yeah. And I guess the fact that very few of us very few of us are appointed to roles that are specifically about sustainability. Within that framework, okay, I'm here to be the sustainability expert. Then that's one thing. But actually, if we're in inverted commas different role, but sustainability is important to everybody, then how do I bring that to the fore? How do I prioritise it?
I did a careers event this week. So we're recording this in what is, I think, Green Careers Week. And I did an event for some students. It was a sustainability panel. And they were asking exactly that. How do I bring sustainability into my job hunt if I'm not going for a traditionally sustainability role? And I don't think that goes away. I think Jenny's right. So the reason that we can't just make this easy is because sustainability is going to mean different things to different people. It's going to mean different things in different roles in terms of what they can and should be doing. And so that makes it tricky to communicate, because it can almost be anything and lots of things, which means that there is no quick win when it comes to embedding or operationalising sustainability.
And that, I think that conversation has to start with understanding what's important to you as a human. So in the careers context, it's about understanding what's of value to you as an individual in terms of where you're going and what you're looking for, the type of organisation you want to work for, and what's important to them. I think the other thing I would add in terms of operationalising sustainability is in exploring what it means and how you do the operationalising. It's as important to know what you're not going to do and what is beyond, what is beyond your sort of direct control and influence, if you like, or is in the kind of to do later box, and acknowledging that that's okay.
Yeah, and understanding your frame of reference, your terms of reference, sphere of influence, and so on. Yeah, this definition of sustainability is one that troubles us, and we a couple of times just within this podcast we've set out to do episodes around the definition of sustainability, and it's either too long or too short. Because we can't cover it. It's wider than carbon emissions, which is one of the kind of common starting points for us. Within the built environment, we talk a lot about waste management. We talk a lot about recyclable building components and this kind of thing, and how we can influence that. But then that's to lose sight of the human element around well-being, which is an important part of this as well. We've got an episode coming up. I'm doing my own adverts for our episodes now as I go along, but we've got one coming up where we're talking about how the effective design can support the well-being of residents in houses and all the rest of it. So sustainability, it's just too wide a topic to sort of have a single action plan relating to it. How do you help people to prioritise within what they can do and could do?
We've been using the SDGs. Well, I say we. I've been using the SDGs. I know Jenny does too. I think before we had the SDGs, it was much more difficult to articulate what the whole looked like. So we definitely find that a useful framework, just from the point of view of, well, sustainability could be all of these things. Which of these things do you think sustainability is or means to you, or you might have some influence over or some control over? And I think considering looking out for opportunities. So Net Positive Futures, when we were deciding what to call ourselves way back, was around finding ways to maximise the potential to make a difference and minimising where we might do harm. So I think that lens in terms of prioritisation can be quite useful. I still find that quite useful. So where can we mitigate the damage that we will inevitably do with this project or intervention? And what are the opportunities to embed sustainability within it, or demonstrate really sustainable practice, or to make change, or to improve something, well-being process, whatever that happens to be. So they're probably my go-tos.
Yeah, and I think in terms of prioritising and working out what's material, I think it's really important to come back to your core activities and stay true to those in the first instance, and also include the voices of a really great range of stakeholders. So not in deciding what the priorities are and why. So that can sometimes not be your usual suspects of stakeholders. It can be about thinking who's not in the room when you're having those when you're doing that prioritization. Who's not here? Who's not represented? And are we making sure that we're giving each of the voices that are here the same airtime?
And I suppose within that there's a strong crossover between the agenda for sustainability and equality and equity and diversity and so on, having all of the stakeholders involved in it, or at least understanding to the best of our ability the perspective of all of the stakeholders in this process.
And we've covered a lot of issues in those last two questions. I think it's central to a lot of the things we've talked about is the kind of the meaning and the language that we use around terms around sustainability, which is why the SDGs are so helpful, because they give us a framework. But I think in involving others in that prioritisation piece, you kind of almost need to start with what do we mean when we use these words, and what language are we using, and what meaning are we attributing to that language, and how are we creating a shared understanding of what that is. And then I think being very transparent about that in talking about your priorities. This is what we mean when we say this, and this is what we've agreed with our stakeholders. This is our collective understanding of that.
What we've talked about there sort of talks about how individuals can influence how they can motivate themselves within this. To take a sort of fairly hot topic from the built environment at the moment, we've got the Grenfell report has been issued recently, and there is a real strong imperative coming from government to understand what the industry, the sector, is doing about this. And one of the real threads there is about end-to-end accountability, and how taking what you've just been talking about around the individuals and the breadth of their understanding, and joining that up. I'm not sure now whether it's horizontally or vertically, but along the life cycle of a project, of a design, of a construction, or whatever else. How do we get a common understanding? Is it language, or is there some other mechanism to make sure that the end-to-end accountability, that the transfer of the concept happens through a piece of work?
We've talked already today about what I would describe as the formal stuff, so the policies and the program documentation, the project documentation, the processes and procedures. And I think it is important to have that that intent written through all of your management system documentation, and your vision and your policy, and whatever other formal structures and bits of governance that you have. That's really important, so having it represented there. But I think it's very hard to build that kind of accountability without having conversations and thinking about how those conversations put an issue like that front and centre of any stage of the project. So I think I think it does come down to individuals and their behaviours, and their being very clear about how representing that intention, what representing that intention looks like day to day as we're going about our jobs, our roles. And I think that probably that starts with leaders demonstrating the right behaviours and saying the right things at the right times, and checking understanding around, have we represented this in what we're doing today? Is it there? Where is it? How will we know it's there?
I do think that learning from something as horrific as Grenfell is really tough learning. But I do think that the importance of that reflecting on what did we learn by, and how will we improve based upon what we've heard at some of those inquiries, I think that's really important. And that's something that maybe it can be built in, and we might learn from some of the approaches to embedding sustainability, that reflection, that doing things, learning from it, and making sure there's space for that learning to be built into what comes next. So what improvements will result from, that kind of horrific incident, making sense of that, create space for that. But also back to those stakeholders, making sure that everybody is heard, and those stakeholder discussions, conversations are built into that.
Yeah, and at every stage, and that comes back to being really clear about what your core activities, your products, your services are, and having the right stakeholders involved at every single point along the way.
I wonder if one of the aspects to this is about everybody understanding the purpose of what they do. One of the things that we've been talking about here a lot recently is the purpose of the built environment sector, or purpose of the construction industry. Is the purpose to build buildings, or is the purpose to provide sustainable urbanisation, sustainable human environments that support well-being and contribute to the end of poverty and reduce pollution in land and sea, and some of this, I think, is about where our horizon sits as individuals. If I'm employed as a bricklayer, I lay bricks. I'm not necessarily directly invested in saving the planet, but there is a direct link from what I do and the impact it has, and so on. I think part of our role as educators around this is some of it is about supporting that perspective, that vision, that challenge, rather than just focusing on the day job and seeing how we're part of a bigger piece. Would you say that holds true from your experience, or am I dreaming?
Well, I think no, I agree, and I think the magic happens when people are given time and space to do some of that thinking, and it's back to my point earlier about contextualizing. So actually, if you take a step back and think about what your wider contribution is, and how you might frame that through a sustainability lens, it can be very powerful. So my doctoral research from sort of 20 years ago looked at the barriers that organisations kind of put in people's way to stop them doing the right thing, because most people want to do the right thing. We just don't quite understand what it is sometimes in a given context. So it's about, I suppose, giving individuals permission to do that thinking, to make sense of their role, both looking up and out at the broader sustainability agenda, but centering it on their own individual values and purpose, and saying, how can I reconcile those things? And all of a sudden, if you do that well, it gives individuals insight into the things that they might do that align with both of those things. And also, I'll reiterate it again, the things that they won't do and why. And I think that can be incredibly powerful. A lot of the work I do with senior leaders does just that, and they leave with real clarity around the practical, what they're going to do.
And there's an element of making it easy for everybody wherever they sit within the delivery of a project. So you mentioned the bricklayer, but those bricklayers understanding their contribution in a way that makes sense of that context is no less important, and there still is a requirement to make space for that. It's where that fits within the organisation. So they will be having to make decisions and judgments, and will be behaving in certain ways in a very localised environment. They arguably might have a bigger impact on the perception of a project and its sustainability than the people that are in leadership positions that are sitting in offices. So it is about understanding who holds which part of the sustainability jigsaw puzzle, really, and what their contribution is. But what needs to be shared is the overarching, as you say, Mike, that what's the vision? Is it just we're building a building, or is it we're creating a space where humans can thrive, or where well-being is central, or something else? And that is back to, well, what is the vision, and have we articulated that?
I think part of the problem for us as a university in influencing thought around this is that a lot of the qualifications that we deliver are governed and structured around competency frameworks that exist in industry. And we've talked a bit about joining up at the practical level and mobilising the workforce to do something about this, and the leaders to do something about this. The influencing government and influencing higher level sector organisations is part of the challenge here. How do we get that message heard?
I mean, universities are pretty well placed to have that message listened to, I would have thought. I mean, as someone that works in universities and other organisations, I think that universities are listened to. I think that there's a question of, do you want to be competent, which doesn't sound terribly ambitious, let's be honest, or do you want to be excellent? It's perhaps something that should be coming out even in the classroom, and that stretch around innovation, innovative practice. Where are there projects and opportunities that do go beyond competence? And there will always be a spectrum of people on any kind of competency framework, but those that are, stretching at the very limits of beyond competence towards that excellence, they're the things that need to be amplified and brought into the light for me. And I personally think universities are relatively well placed to do that. Jenny might disagree.
Well, I think we are really well positioned to do that. I think I'm always really nervous around competencies because it feels as if there's a sort of one size is right for everyone, and I think one of the things we really need in terms of driving sustainability is diversity of skills and knowledge and behaviours, actually, and recognising that you need a mix of individuals to make things more sustainable. So I'm generally a little bit nervous around competencies and the sense that the tick boxy nature of those sorts of things. I think, but I'm also very alert to the fact that actually criticality isn't for thinking critically, for example, doesn't come naturally to everybody. So how do we find I think I'm more interested in the balance of a given team or across an organisation, and giving arming individuals with the skills to recognise themselves, what they're bringing, and actually what's missing, and who else they might need in the room to make a whole. So I don't think I've answered your question really, Mike, but I think universities are well positioned, and I think we need to think a little bit creatively about how we view some of those sorts of frameworks around competencies. What I can add as well, which is anecdotal, is I know that when I'm teaching about leadership for sustainability, often some of the competencies that I'm talking about, the knowledge, the skills, the behaviours that individuals need, to do well in this space, are very counterintuitive to some of the leaders that I'm working with, and they aren't. And it takes a certain amount of bravery to do things differently and to lead differently. So if you look at some of the inner development goals, the work around the inner development goals, it's all about driving a new way of thinking and being. So I think there's something about being a little bit brave as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's where I started that. Let's go beyond. Let's stretch ourselves beyond competency. Now, not everybody will want to be stretched beyond competency, let's be honest. Some people do just want to tick the boxes, and maybe that's fine. I think Jenny's point about having an eye to where you are particularly competent and where other people might complement that is really sensible. So thinking about yourself as a whole, but more importantly, teams and organisations, I think there's definitely something in that. I think that the question, Mike's probably driven by the fact that you're limited by competency frameworks. Now there
to a
are
certain extent, absolutely.
And so that anything where you feel like you are stretching and limited by something, I mean, where Jenny and I probably both would go would be, well, how do we break out of this box? How do we look beyond this framework? And for me, it's always the framework and. So there will be people working in the competency plus spaces, or there will be people looking at other frameworks. So there are competency frameworks around sustainability, or education for sustainable development in particular, thinking skills and encouraging individuals to look beyond just the the taught subjects and how they might, thinking more about how they might apply them. So there might be something in that kind of looking at those overlaps as well.
Yeah. And it's something we find ourselves doing more and more is looking wider and looking at a matrix of organisations that are leading with different frameworks, and rather than slavishly sticking to one particular horizontal or vertical, we're trying to blend across them and bring these things in. And I suppose some of it is about the ability of frameworks to keep pace with a rapidly developing thought process as much as anything else.